Hey everybody, before we get into the episode of Moon Knight, if you guys need a recap of Loki, since that's coming back, I'll put a tab up in the corner. In Moon Knight, we get introduced to Stephen Grant. He sleepwalks, so he has this routine every night before he goes to bed where he basically locks himself up, puts sand around his bed, and tape on his door to make sure he didn't go anywhere. When he does finally wake up, he goes to his job at a museum where they have a huge Egypt exhibit, and he's an Egypt nerd. This guy knows a whole lot about ancient Egypt and the gods, so you would think he'd be a tour guide, but in fact, he's not. He actually just works the gift shop. While he's getting set up for the day, one of his coworkers comes up, and she's pretty gorgeous and says, "We're still on for tomorrow, right?" And Steven has no idea what she's talking about. She tells him, the best steak we're on, and he's still confused. He thinks she's asking him out on a date, and when he says that to her, she kind of just laughs. Seems like she knows about their plans and he doesn't remember making them. Not that he's objecting. She's gorgeous once again. The weirdest part is he's a vegan, which his boss Donna brings up. Donna's extremely rude to him. So he doesn't exactly know what he's going to eat, but telling a woman about the best steak in town is just a weird move for a vegan. He doesn't really think anything of it though, because now at least he's got plans. Before he didn't. He seems like a pretty big loner. The only person he really confides in is this street performer who stands extremely still like a statue and poses with people. He heads to the street performer after work and starts telling him about the date, but what he's concerned about is if this thing gets serious, he can't exactly have ankle constraints around his bed. That night he heads home, and before bed he does his whole routine, putting the sand out, putting the tape on the door. But the thing about Steven is he doesn't want to sleep. He tries everything he can to stay awake because he doesn't know where he goes at night. So he does things like a Rubik's Cube or reading books about ancient Egypt and learning about the hieroglyphics, learning different languages, anything to keep his mind up. It doesn't work. Steven wakes up in the middle of nowhere with his jaw pretty messed up. He cracks that in a place which looks very uncomfortable, and he seems to be on the outskirts of town. To make things worse, he's hearing a voice in his head telling him to go back to sleep, worm. It's also telling him that he's not supposed to be there. That's something that Steven completely agrees with. The voice then tells him to surrender the body to Mark, which he doesn't understand at all. When he digs into his pocket to get some kind of clue on how he ended up here, he has a little tiny Egyptian beetle with him. It's gold-plated. It's an artifact. It's another very confusing thing in the journey of how he ended up on the outskirts of this town. He does finally see some people, but they end up shooting at him. He makes his way in town to get some help, but he seems to be surrounded by all of these guys looking for him. When he makes his way to the center of the town, there's a lot more people, so he's able to blend in. But when church bells go off, everybody makes way for this one singular man, a man named Arthur Harrow. To give you an idea of Arthur Harrow, this is a guy who walks with a cane, and I don't actually know if he has anything wrong with his legs or not. It might be because he likes to break glass, put them in his shoes, and just walk off with the glass crunching on his feet. Yeah, he's a weird dude. He also seems to have a lot of followers, though, and they are all gathered in this one singular location. He starts telling the people what a beautiful day it is, and it feels like heaven, but it's not heaven, because sometimes the darkness hides in our hearts. What he is there to do is to make the earth as much like heaven as possible. He asks for a volunteer for somebody to go first, and a man steps up. He rolls up his sleeves to reveal a scale tattoo. And then, with the cane that he uses to walk, he holds the man's hands and the cane starts swaying left to right. But so does the tattoo. He tells the man that he judges him in Ammit's name. And Ammit is an ancient Egyptian god. For this man, he is dubbed to be a good person, so he gets to live. Later on, a woman gets up and she is judged to be a bad person. The thing about Ammit's judging is, it's not necessarily on what you did in the past. It also looks into what you will do in the future. So her being a bad person might be something that she's going to do down the line. Unfortunately for her, she has to die because of it. As they're taking the body out, one of Harrow's men lets him know that there was a problem with the exchange. Somebody killed 2 of their men. To make sure that the person is still there, Harrow gives an instruction in Egyptian, and everybody bows down except Steven. He's late to the party, but this gives himself up. Harrow looks at Steven and says, "You're a mercenary." And Steven says, "Oh, no, not me. I'm a gift shopist." He tells Harrow that his name's Stephen Grant. He's trying to get back home. Harrow seems to believe him and asks that Steven return the scarab, which is the Egyptian beetle that he found in his pocket. But when he goes to hand it over, Steven hears the voice in his head say, "You will do no such thing." And his body won't actually allow him to hand it over. No matter how hard Steven tries, his body refuses to. He starts apologizing until eventually Harrow's men carry him off. Steven's pretty scared he's going to get killed, and then all of a sudden he blacks out. When he wakes up, his hand is covered in blood, he's holding the scarab, and the men that were carrying him are all dead around him. He has no idea what happened. Harrow and the rest of the community are all staring at him dumbfounded. And Steven starts apologizing, but he realizes pretty quickly, I got to get the hell out of here. As he's trying to get out of there, he hears the voice once again say, "Don't you dare drop the scarab." Steven then hops into a cupcake truck and tries to flee, getting back home, but he's being followed. One of the men is able to get into the truck, and it looks like it's going to be curtains for Steven, but then he blacks out once again. And when he wakes up, the guy is dead, and there's a car flipped over behind them. Steven hears the voice say, "Wake up, Mark. If he loses the scarab, I'm going to kill you both." And poor Steven just doesn't know what's going on. He once again blacks out. He's still being chased by a couple of guys, and he once again blacks out. When he wakes up, now he's driving backwards. He yells, "I don't know what I'm doing," and he hears the voice say, "Then leave us be, parasite." Right as a bunch of logs are about to crush everybody around them, Steven wakes up. He thinks, all right, this is just a dream, and he's really relieved about it. The tape is still on the door, and it truly looks like he was just dreaming. But then he notices something really, really weird. The fish in his tank has two fins, which might be normal for most people, but the thing is, the day before, that fish only had one fin. So he heads to the pet store, where the woman explains to him for a second time that she doesn't sell disabled fish. Steven points out that this is the first time he was there, but she says, "No, you were here yesterday. I told you the same thing." He then notices that the clock says 5 p.m., which is peculiar because he just woke up. As the woman at the pet store points out, the fish is wrong, the clock is wrong, maybe you're wrong. He doesn't have time to argue with her because he has to get to his hot date. He shows up, she doesn't. And when he calls her to find out where she is, turns out he was actually the one who stood her up. Because while he thinks it's Friday, it's actually Sunday. And she no longer wants to talk to him. When he gets home, he's pretty depressed, but he sees something weird on the floor. There's scrape marks, and it's caused by his table that he doesn't move. So he follows the scrape marks and notices that there's a board in the wall that is ajar. When he opens it up and looks inside, he sees a storage locker key and a Razor cell phone that I desperately wanted from the year 2006. In the Razor's call logs, there's a missed call from a girl named Layla. I should say there's about 30 missed calls from a girl named Layla. There is one missed call from a guy named Duchamp, but everything else is Layla. And then the phone rings once again, and it's Layla. She's relieved to get Steven on the phone. She's been calling and texting him for months trying to find out where he is, but he hasn't been answering. Steven, of course, has no idea who Layla is. And Layla can't figure out why Steven is putting on this accent. He tries to explain to her that he just found this cell phone in his apartment. That's it. Layla finally asks, "What's wrong with you, Mark?" And that's now the second time he's been called Mark. The first time by the voice in his head, now by Layla. And he doesn't know who Mark is. He asks her, "Who is this?" But she just hangs up. He then suddenly hears a voice call his name. And now he's worried that somebody else is in the apartment. The voice is telling him he needs to stop. "You're going to get yourself in trouble." He looks all over the apartment and doesn't find anybody. But then the lights in his apartment start flickering. Books start falling all over the place. It seems like an earthquake is going down. And he tries to flee. He gets in his building's elevator, but it doesn't go to the floor that he wanted to. Instead, it goes to a floor where there is an Egyptian god chasing him. When he cowers to try to shield himself, turns out it's just an old lady who's freaked out by his behavior. As he begs the question, "What is going on?" and turns around in the elevator, the Egyptian god is standing right behind him. He screams in fear, but he wakes up on a bus, having no idea how he got there. When he looks outside, he sees the thing that was chasing him, but then it quickly disappears. He gets off at the next stop, but he notices another passenger on the bus. It was Harrow from his dream. So now he knows that he's real. He heads to work where he tells the security guard, "Hey man, somebody's following me. Can you just not let people in?" Which the security guard tells him, "That's going to be hard to do, man. It is a museum. We have to let just about everybody in." And no matter how much he asks for help, the security guard is giving him none. Harrow does end up entering the museum, finding Steven and freaking him out. Stephen goes and gets another security guard, but it turns out that security guard is working with Harrow. He has the same matching tattoo. Stephen tells Harrow that he doesn't have the scarab. And Harrow tells him, the scarab doesn't belong to me. It belongs to Ammit. The story about Ammit that Stephen is familiar with is that Ammit is an Egyptian deity who really was the first boogeyman. Harrow kind of chuckles at that and says, she was a boogeyman for evildoers. She got sick of waiting for sinners to commit their crime before punishing them. The justice of Ammit surveys the whole of our lives. Past, present, future, all of it. She knows what we've done and what we will do. If Ammit had been free, she would have prevented Hitler and genocide, but she was betrayed by fellow gods. And she was betrayed by her own avatar. Stephen asks him, are you going to kill me? And Harrow doesn't answer the question, just saying, that voice in your head. It's maddening, isn't it? He's forever unsatisfied no matter how hard you tried to please him. He then gives him the same morality test that he gave the guy and the woman in the Alps. When it ends, Harrow just looks at Stephen and says, there's chaos in you. Stephen doesn't know what that means, so he runs away, and Harrow tells his men, go ahead, let him run. Stephen's biggest mistake is he continues to go to work, which means he has to close up the museum. He's all alone in there at night, and he hears growling. Next thing you know, Stephen is being chased by an Egyptian jackal. He then hears over the intercom Harrow say, give me the scarab, and you won't be torn apart. But Stephen doesn't have it, or at least not that he knows. He finally locks himself in one of the bathrooms, and from behind him he hears a voice say, you need to give me control. When he turns around, he sees his reflection, but his reflection is talking to him. And his reflection has an American accent, not an English one. The voice, who is Mark, tells Stephen, that thing is about to break through here and kill us both. Let me save us. Stephen finally agrees, and Mark takes over the body, killing the jackal and destroying the bathroom in the process. Because it turns out, Mark is the Moon Knight. In episode 2, Stephen wakes up still hearing the jackal. Once he uncuffs himself, he heads over to the mirror and asks to talk to the other guy, but the other guy isn't there. He decides to do what any normal person would do. They go into work. But at the museum, they're fixing the destruction that was caused by the jackal, Stephen, and the other guy. He sees a security guard who claims that it was a burst pipe, although the security guard is suspicious of that. And Stephen asks, have you looked at the tape? Security guard says, no, I'm about to do that now. And Stephen tells him, wait till you see what's on it. But when they go to look at it, you don't see the jackal. You don't see Harrow. All you see is Stephen cowering, Stephen running into the bathroom, and then eventually Stephen leaving. Although, as he tells the security guard, when I left, that wasn't me. Unfortunately for Stephen, now the museum knows who destroyed the bathroom. So they bring him in to let him know that he's being fired. They're not going to press charges, they just want him to leave. Right before he leaves, the security guard asks if he has any museum property on him. And Stephen doesn't, at least not that he knows of. All he has is the Razor cell phone and the storage locker key. He needs somebody to talk to about this, but the only person that will listen is that street performer. And after talking to him, he realizes that if he can find this storage locker, he can prove to himself that he's not crazy. So Stephen goes gallivanting through London, and on the 7th try, he finally finds a place where the person recognizes him. He leads him to a storage locker that Stephen's never been before. And this unit is set up as if someone was living there. It's got a cot, it's got food, it's also got a duffel bag full of money with fake passports. And the passport has Stephen's photo, but it says Mark Spector. So now Stephen knows who his alter ego is. He also finds something else in that duffel bag. Deep inside is a scarab. And when he lifts it up, it opens up like a drone. Stephen thinks it's a compass, but he doesn't know what it's pointing to. And that's when he hears Mark from behind him. Mark apologized to Stephen, telling him that he wasn't supposed to see any of this. He goes on to explain how Stephen is in danger, and he can save him just like he did the previous night. But what he can't have him do is meddle. And Stephen does not take this news well at all. He yells at Mark, tell me what you are. Mark tells him that he serves the god of the moon, a god named Khonshu. Mark Spector is Khonshu's avatar, which means that, in a way, Stephen Grant is also Khonshu's avatar. Their job is to protect the vulnerable and deliver Khonshu's justice to those that hurt them. Mark made a deal with Khonshu, and that deal is contingent on Stephen not meddling. So he tells Stephen, I need the body, and once it's done, you're never going to see me again. Stephen doesn't really like that deal. He has his own plan. He's going to take all that illegal stuff in the duffel bag and go to the police with it. He's completely okay with the scenario that the police lock him up and throw him in an insane asylum. He hopes that maybe they chalk him up with enough pills that Mark is out of his head forever. It's not going to be that simple, though. When he leaves the storage facility, Khonshu is in the hallway waiting for him. He tries to outrun Khonshu, but he's unable to, and he turns a corner right into Khonshu, who tells him, "Give it back, you fool." Khonshu's a little moody. Steven doesn't follow that advice and runs out in the street where he's nearly hit by a woman on a moped, but that woman recognizes him. She calls him Mark, and Steven figures that she must be Layla, and in fact she is. He begs her to give him a ride back to Steven's apartment, even though she thinks she's talking to Mark. And during that ride, you find out that Layla and Mark are married. When they arrive at Steven's apartment, they find out that they have a lot in common, Steven and Layla. He knows all about Egyptian history, and she is Egyptian. She also knows French, and he knows French. But even though they seem to be hitting it off, Layla doesn't buy the fact Mark is, quote, using an accent. She came there for a purpose. It's because Mark had sent her divorce papers, but they were unsigned. So she had to track them down, show up, and get them signed. And Steven is floored. He can't believe anybody would dump her. As Steven is insulting Mark for being an idiot, Mark is listening and pleading with Steven to leave Layla alone. The whole time, Steven is ignoring him. But just before Steven is about to show Layla what's in the bag, Mark yells, "You're gonna get her killed," and that's enough for Steven to stop. Although, it's not enough to kill Layla's curiosity. She starts looking through the bag and quickly finds the scarab, and that's when she gets really pissed off. She knows exactly what the scarab is. It's the scarab pointing to Ammit's tomb. And this was something that her and Mark fought side by side to get. Now she thinks that Mark is divorcing her just so he can keep it for himself. This causes Steven to say, "Go ahead, take it. I don't want it." And he tries to once again explain that he is not Mark Spector. He's Steven Grant. But the conversation gets interrupted when two police officers knock on the door. They barge their way in and start looking around, but they don't find Layla. She's gone. What they do find is that duffel bag full of money and the fake passport, and that's enough to take Steven in. When they run the name Mark Spector, what they find is shocking. Because Mark Spector is an international fugitive. He was a part of a team of mercenaries that hit a dig site in Egypt. They zip-tied all of the archaeologists and shot them. This is really surprising to the cops, but it turns out they're not cops because they don't take him to a police precinct. They're, in fact, working with Harrow. Steven knows that he's in a tough predicament, and he's visited by Mark in a reflection that says, "Just give me your body. I'll take care of these people." But Steven doesn't want to do it because he saw what Mark did in that small village. He doesn't want to kill. A little while later, Harrow shows up and uncuffs him. They start walking through this small part of town, and Harrow tells him that it used to be the worst part of town. But after Ammit's judgment, it's now safe. So safe that people leave their doors unlocked. As they're discussing this, Steven sees Khonshu, and by his reaction, Harrow knows that Steven is looking at Khonshu. So he tells Steven, he can't hurt you. Don't worry about it. And it does put Steven's mind at ease. As Steven and Harrow make their way into a building, Khonshu is throwing a temper tantrum. And everything that Khonshu is telling Steven, Harrow's already heard. Because Harrow used to be Khonshu's avatar. That is, until he escaped. Harrow explains that Khonshu's justice comes too late. By the time it shows up, people have already suffered. Ammit knows this. That's why she casts her judgment before evil is done. And that is why their entire mission is to resurrect Ammit. This could create a better world. But they can't do it without the scarab. Steven tells him, "I don't have it," and Harrow doesn't believe him. Steven, though, has some questions on Ammit's judgment style. Like, are you going to kill a child just because of something that might happen 30 years down the line? Or what about the people that think about killing their boss, but they're never actually going to act on it? Harrow compares it to cutting off a limb to save the body. And that doesn't sit well with Steven because, as he points out, a child isn't a limb. Harrow then shows Steven his cane. It was Ammit's gift to her first avatar, and it contains a sliver of her power. The cane then starts glowing purple, and you can tell this thing would mess you up. Harrow says to Steven, "I don't want to use it, but you gotta give me the scarab." And Mark, knowing what could happen, is warning Steven the entire time, "Don't give up Layla's name, give me the body." But Steven is going to have to give up Layla's name because Layla does that all on her own. She jumps out of the corner and says, "I have it. I have the scarab." As Layla makes her way forward to Harrow, Steven can hear Khonshu tell Mark, "There's no deal in this. You better fix this, Mark." But right before Layla hands it over to Harrow, she turns to Steven and says, "Summon the suit." and that means nothing to Steven. He has no idea what she's talking about. She then gives him the scarab and starts to run away. And as they're trying to get out of there, you find out that Layla is a complete and total badass. She is picking Harrow's men apart. Harrow knows that he can't let the scarab get out of his possession. So he uses that cane, and you see the power. A portal opens up, and a jackal comes out. Steven and Layla barricade themselves in a room, but the jackal is standing outside, ready to bust itself in. Layla starts explaining to Steven that his real name is Mark, and there is a suit that he uses. She's literally seen him use it. All this time, Mark is begging Steven to just let him use the body. But that's when the jackal busts through the door and tackles Steven through a window. That's when Steven just yells to summon the suit. And it works, kind of. He summons a suit, but he looks more like me trying to go to my senior prom in '06. It doesn't look anything like Mark's suit. Mark starts making fun of him, telling him that he's supposed to conjure the ceremonial armor from Khonshu's temple, not this suit from Joseph A. Bank. But they don't really have time to talk because Steven starts getting attacked by that jackal, although Steven's the only one that can see it. Layla can't. In fact, she thinks he's being possessed until she throws some water on it and sees that there is a monster attacking him. Believe it or not, Steven is able to knock this jackal out, but as he's celebrating it, the jackal pops up and starts beating him up again. At this point, Steven gave it his all, and it's not enough. He needs to let Mark have the body. And Mark fares a lot better than Steven when it comes to killing a jackal. He destroys it pretty quickly. As soon as he transforms back from the Moon Knight to Mark Spector, he starts looking for the scarab, but he can't find it. And that's because the scarab fell out of Steven's possession when he fell out of the window. It gets picked up by a homeless man, and that homeless man is found by Harrow, who kills him and takes it. That's one problem that Mark has. The other problem that Mark has is Steven wants to retake the body, but Steven doesn't have enough power to do that. And now he's got Steven yelling at him, telling him that he has no right to take the body. But Mark needs to finish the deal that he made with Khonshu. What really annoys Steven is the fact that he finally realizes all the things wrong in his life. The fact that he sleepwalks, the fact that he can't go on a date, the fact that he has to chain himself up at night is all because of Mark Spector. Mark promises him that once he's done and repaid the debt, Steven will never see him again. They then somehow get into an argument about Mark's relationship with Layla. And Mark explains to Steven that Khonshu was planning on making Layla Mark's replacement. He couldn't let that happen, so he divorced her. But this is the final straw for Mark. He gets so sick of listening to Steven that he bashes the glass to destroy the reflection, shutting him up. He's then visited by Khonshu, who reminds him that he was nothing more than a corpse when Khonshu found him. And the fact that Mark thinks he owns that body is laughable. Mark swears to him that they'll find the scarab, but Khonshu tells him it's too late. Harrow has it. And that means that Mark has to get to Ammit's tomb first. But there's only one way to do that. They have to go to Egypt. In episode 3, Layla also needs to go to Cairo. Even though she's Egyptian, she needs a fake passport. She goes to someone that's not only familiar with her, but also familiar with her father. It might be a family friend, it might be a family member, hell, it might even be her mother, but we don't know. You find out through the two conversing that Layla's father was an archaeologist. He, like Layla, was also after the scarab. But as Layla goes off to meet Mark in Cairo, Harrow's already arrived. And with the scarab directing him to Ammit's tomb, it doesn't take too long for him to find it. He's so excited that he doesn't even care when he gets word that Mark Spector is in Cairo. That doesn't mean he's not going to take preemptive measures. Because when Mark gets a lead on where the dig site might be and he goes to meet that lead, the lead just got stabbed by a bunch of Harrow's men. The men start attacking Mark, but Mark can handle his own. When it comes time for Mark to actually kill these guys, that's when Steven shows up in a reflection, begging him not to kill them. All of a sudden, Mark blacks out. When he wakes up, he's in the back of a taxi cab, having no idea how he got there or where he's headed. Turns out he told the taxi driver to take him to the airport. He then suddenly sees the guys who attacked him walking out of a building, and he needs answers. They, in turn, need to get the hell away from him. They don't want any parts of him after what he did to him. He chases after them in the street, and eventually he catches up to one of them. He starts punching the guy, demanding to know where Harrow is, but then it's like Groundhog Day. He sees his reflection. It's Steven begging him to stop, and this distracts Mark long enough for him to get knocked out. Mark blacks out once again, and when he wakes up, he's on the top of a building with most of the guys dead. Mark has no idea how they got to that point, and there's only one of Harrow's men left alive. Khonshu starts pressuring Mark to get answers from him, taking him over to the ledge and threatening to throw him off. But Mark doesn't want to do it. He's a kid. Khonshu pressures him, though, saying that if he does that, the kid will talk. So Mark gives in, escorting the kid over to the ledge and demanding to know where the dig site is. But the kid doesn't talk, deciding that he'd rather kill himself than to give up the location. Because of this, they now need a plan B. Mark asks Khonshu, what about the other gods? I mean, are they really going to stand by and allow Harrow to unleash Ammit? Can't you summon a meeting? But Khonshu is hesitant to ask for an audience with the gods. The last time he did that, he was imprisoned in stone. After thinking on it, though, Khonshu realizes this is the best option. So he sends the gods a message that even they can't ignore. He changes the sky. It works. They all show up, or at least their avatars do, and they convene inside the Great Pyramid. And by the way, this includes Harrow, who knows he's about to be called upon. The first avatar that Mark meets is Yatzil. She's the avatar of Hathor, goddess of music and love. Her and Khonshu used to be pretty close. Yatzil, though, gets called away by the other gods who want to speed this up and start the meeting. And unfortunately for Khonshu, the guy who seems to be leading the meeting doesn't really like him too much. He says that if Khonshu changes the sky again, he'll be imprisoned in stone. Mark starts explaining to the gods why he called the meeting. The threat of Harrow unleashing Ammit is too great. But in turn, Harrow makes the case that Mark isn't doing so well. He basically paints Mark as crazy to the other avatars. Mark asks Harrow in front of everybody else, do you not want to raise Ammit from the tomb? Harrow doesn't exactly say yes, although he also doesn't exactly say no, telling the gods that Khonshu is nothing more than jealous and paranoid. And this speech by Harrow works. The gods side with Harrow and don't really think he's a threat. After the meeting, Yatzil pulls Mark aside and explains there might be another way to find out where the tomb is. Ammit was buried in secret. The location was hidden even from the gods. But there was one person who knew where Ammit's tomb was, just in case the gods had to bring Ammit back. The person who knew was a magi named Senfu. So if you find Senfu, you'll find the tomb. The issue is Senfu's sarcophagus was stolen, and no one has any idea where it is. So Mark is going to have to go to the black market and try to locate it. But if he's able to locate the sarcophagus, he should be able to locate the tomb. Mark decides to hit the streets, looking for the sarcophagus and asking around, but he's not getting anywhere. And that's when he runs into Layla. Layla points out to him, you're not getting anywhere with this because you're not Egyptian. Nobody trusts you. You don't know where to look. So Layla starts poking around, and it doesn't take long for Layla to find out who has a sarcophagus. But she points out to Mark, I'm not here to help you. I'm here to help me and everybody else who would die if Harrow succeeds. The two head over to inspect the sarcophagus in a boat, and as they're on the trip, she tells Mark, you could have told me about Steven. And he explains to her that until recently, Steven was under control. She asks what changed, and Mark just tells her it doesn't matter. They then arrive at a guy named Anton Mogart's compound. Mogart owns the sarcophagus. He's very rich and has a lot of friends with a lot of guns. Because of this, just to be on the safe side, Mark stashes a book bag full of supplies that could possibly help him out under one of the docks. They then head in. But as they're walking closer to the house, Mark notices that they were being followed. He's not quite sure if it's Harrow's men, but he's pretty confident. They decide to deal with it later and continue to head in. They start getting their stories down, and Mark asks her, how do you know this guy? Layla knows Mogart from their run-ins in Madripoor. The two seem to have a good relationship, and they're old friends. Because of this, he doesn't mind showing them the sarcophagus, but this is a big deal to him. He has a massive collection, and this is one of the prized possessions in it. He's also a little weary of their motives. So he lets them in, but he keeps a keen eye on them. They start looking around the sarcophagus, but there's no real clue on where the tomb is. It's at this moment where they know they need Steven. Mark doesn't want to do it, but even he knows he needs Steven. So Layla heads out to distract Mogart's men, as Mark continues to talk to Steven, trying to get some hint on what they can do to find out where the tomb is. Steven quickly notices that there are pieces of cloth in the sarcophagus where, if you fold them, it should lead to a map where the tomb would be located. Mark starts doing that, but he gets caught by Mogart's head of security. Just instinctually, Mark disarms him with his own gun, but he quickly has two other security guards with guns pointed at him. It causes Mark to stand down. Mogart is pissed, and Layla begs him for mercy, saying they were just trying to save lives. Mogart, though, is incensed, and it looks like they're about to kill Mark when they get interrupted by Harrow. He tells Mogart, I could probably offer you something much more tangible than whatever they're offering you. And he pulls out the scarab. Layla once again begs Mogart not to listen, but he does. Harrow then turns his attention to both Layla and Mark, telling him, you two have much more in common than you know. Like, Layla, you keep thinking that distance will prevent the wounds from your father's death from reopening. But something stands in your way. It's the fact that your husband doesn't tell you the truth. And Mark, you don't tell her the truth because you know that if you do, she'll see you exactly as you see yourself. He then turns his attention back to Mogart, asking him, do you want to see real power? And all the while, Khonshu is standing behind them, begging Mark to summon the suit. As Mark is sitting there watching Harrow give a quasi-demonstration on the power from the staff, Mark does finally summon the suit. He starts taking all of Mogart's men out while Layla is tasked with grabbing the pieces of cloth from the sarcophagus so they can find out where the tomb is. They're able to get out of there, but once they get down the road and it seems like they're safe, Layla asks, what was Harrow talking about? That whole, you're not telling me the truth stuff. Of course, Mark knows exactly what Harrow was talking about, but he deflects, saying that Harrow was just trying to get in her head. What freaks out Layla is the fact that she never told anyone why she really moved, but somehow Harrow knew. You can tell, though, that there is definitely trust issues between the two. They then head to the middle of the desert and they start putting the pieces of cloth together that form constellations. Problem is, they're having trouble doing it. Mark doesn't want to admit it, but he knows he needs Steven's help. So he tags Steven in, and Steven is quickly able to put it together, figuring out exactly the constellations and the stars. But there's one giant issue. When that map was put together, the sky was slightly different than it is now. Stars move over time. So if they follow the map that they have, they're not going to get to the tomb. They need to know what the sky looked like back when the map was made. And since it was hundreds of years ago, there's nobody around that actually knows that. But then Khonshu speaks up, because he remembers. Even though he knows it's going to get him in trouble with the other gods, he, along with Steven, turned the clock back, changing the sky from today to what it used to be. This does result in Khonshu getting locked up in stone. Before he is locked up, he does yell, have Mark come find me. But this also gives both Steven and Layla, and Mark, I guess, a pinpoint location on where the tomb is. Khonshu's stone is taken to the Great Pyramid, where the Avatar, who seems to be in charge, calls Harrow to let him know you were right about Khonshu. Now, he's tethered to this place. Harrow doesn't know if Khonshu can hear him or not, but he decides to speak to him anyway, telling him that he's going to do what Khonshu couldn't. And when it's finished, I want you to remember one thing. Your torment forced me to do it. In episode 4, doing what Steven did to the sky put a strain on him so much that he was knocked out. Layla tries to revive him, and as she's doing so, a few of Harrow's men show up to get rid of them. Thanks to some quick thinking, Layla is able to dispose them. That is when Steven finds it to be a convenient time to wake up. They then head off to the tomb, and as they're heading over to the tomb, Layla mentions that they're probably going to need Mark for this part. And Steven says, no, me and Mark made a deal that once he was done with Khonshu, he was gone for good. All the while, Mark is arguing with Steven about this, because while Khonshu is locked up, they no longer have his protection. That includes the suits. So Mark wants to be tagged in because he's a little better equipped to deal with Harrow's men. This also doesn't sit well with Layla. She asks him, so he was just going to leave my life as well? You didn't think I'd want to be made aware of that? And as Steven points out, Mark kind of already did disappear from her life. When the two eventually come across the dig site, the noticeable thing about it is nobody's there. They start poking around it, trying to find any supplies they might need, and then they start heading in. Before they step foot in the tomb, Mark begs Steven one last time to let him take over the body. But Steven won't. He tries to tell Steven that it's for Layla as well, but Steven still won't. And Mark asks him, wait, are you in love with my wife? Because if you lay one finger on her, but Steven walks away, not even letting Mark finish the sentence. But the fact is, yeah, he kind of is in love with her. He's definitely fallen for her at least, and he thinks she's perfect. Right before they head into the tomb, Steven tells Layla exactly why Mark filed for divorce. He felt like she should know that Khonshu was planning on taking her as his avatar if Mark somehow died or did what Harrow did. Layla makes mention of the fact that honesty is more of a Steven thing. Steven feels like this is a good time to kiss her. And I'm going to be honest with you. Quite frankly, she kisses him back. It's at that moment that they both finally head into the tomb. And when they do, Steven starts geeking out over the fact that they're some of the first people to step foot into this tomb. Steven is just a giant Egypt nerd. Layla tells him about her father, the archaeologist, and how he would have loved to be there. He ended up dying trying to find it. Steven had no idea about this, so he apologizes. And she says, no, it's fine, really. They start heading deeper into the tomb. And what they're looking for is Ammit's prison of stone. It's basically the same thing that Khonshu was put in. The second room they go into, they notice that there's empty bullet casings, which is weird. Steven also notices the Eye of Horus. And what he realizes is the building is in the shape of the Eye of Horus. They figure that they'll find Ammit in the tongue part. So at least now they have a map. They just have to find it. The third room the two step into is much bigger, although it looks like there's an ancient Egyptian autopsy table right smack dab in the middle. And what's concerning is the fact that it has fresh blood on it. There's also blood all over the floor leading to the entrance to yet another room, and they don't really want to follow that trail of blood. So they need to find another way in, and that's when Steven notices that there's an opening above them. He heads up there to look around and once again starts geeking out over all of the things he's seeing. Layla reminds him, we're looking for a way in, and he lets her know, oh, we can totally go this way. But then all of a sudden they hear a gun go off and screams from the distance. And that's when something starts dragging a body into that room. Steven hides, but he's safe already. He's up top. Layla is the one who truly is in danger because she has to hide on the ground near the autopsy table from this ancient Egyptian monster. It might be a jackal. But whatever it is, both Steven and Layla don't want to run into it. This Egyptian jackal temple guard starts dissecting the body right near Layla. And unfortunately for Layla, as she's trying to avoid it, she ends up knocking into something and alerting it to the fact that somebody else is there. When this happens, Steven tells her to run, simultaneously pushing down a bunch of items to crush it. It works. Layla is able to get away, but the two end up splitting up. As Layla is trying to find her way to Ammit, she gets attacked by yet another temple guard. She's able to thwart it by shoving a flare into its eye and throwing it into a pit of despair. All of this, though, is seen by Harrow, who is on the other side of the pit. And it doesn't seem like there's a real easy way for him to get to her. Even though there's no bridge over and it doesn't look like Harrow can get to her and there's no threat, Harrow starts talking to her because she is in earshot. She doesn't have plans on listening to him until he brings up her father, and that ropes her back into this conversation she didn't want to be into in the first place. Harrow starts putting the pieces down, and Layla is able to put the puzzle together. That the thing Mark wasn't telling her was Mark was the mercenary at the dig site the day her father was murdered. She feels betrayed and hurt that Mark was the one who did it, but she doesn't want to show Harrow that, so she leaves, going deeper into the tomb, where hopefully she'll be able to confront Mark about this when she meets up with Steven. And shortly after she's out of eyesight, Harrow gets word from his men that they found another way into the tomb, because they are looking for the exact same thing that Steven and Layla are looking for. And while Harrow was divulging to Layla that Mark probably killed her father, Steven had found his way into the tomb that they were looking for. And as Steven is once again geeking out, he's visited by Mark in a reflection where Mark confronts him about the fact that Steven kissed his wife, but also the fact that everything Steven said was accurate. He did abandon her a long time ago. Steven then starts reading the hieroglyphics on the tomb, and the conclusion he comes to is that the sarcophagus that they're looking at must be holding Alexander the Great, and that Alexander the Great must have been Ammit's avatar. He also knows that the Egyptians would have hidden Ammit's Upshapti, which is Ammit's prison. Well, they would have hidden the Upshapti somewhere that wasn't easy to find. Since Alexander the Great was the avatar and he spoke for her, Steven thinks that there's a chance the Upshapti might be in the mummified mouth. Steven then rips open the bandages, breaks the jaw, and sure enough, he's able to locate it. When Layla walks in, she finds Steven celebrating the fact that he was able to locate it and they've won. But she's in no mood to celebrate. She demands to talk to Mark. She needs to get answers to what Harrow told her. Steven tags Mark in, and the story that Mark has is he didn't kill her father. But he was one of the mercenaries, and he did lead his boss there. His boss was the one who killed her father. His boss also double-crossed him and shot him, leaving him for dead where Khonshu found him, saving him. When Mark was all better, he went to go find Layla and tell her what happened, but he couldn't bring himself to do it. And what upsets Layla the most is the fact that the only reason they got married was Mark felt guilty about what he did to her father. They don't have time to discuss it anymore because they hear Harrow's men coming and they need to find an exit quick. As Layla goes to look for one, Mark tasks himself with holding Harrow's men off. Harrow walks in and sees that Mark has the Upshati, telling him that he needs to hand it over, and it looks like for a second Mark is going to. And that's when he just starts killing all of Harrow's men. Harrow, though, is done dealing with Mark's crap. He pulls out a gun and shoots him twice. Without the protection of Khonshu, Mark falls into the water, shot, and it looks like he's going to die. And in all honesty, he might. We don't know, because when Mark wakes up, he's in a psychiatric hospital. And the craziest part is, everybody in the insane asylum are people that he's interacted with. In the rec area, all of the patients are watching a movie, which is his favorite movie. It's basically an Indiana Jones ripoff, but instead of Indiana Jones, the main character's name is Stephen Grant. When he goes to talk to the therapist is Harrow. Everything seems to be pointing to the fact that Mark made up all of this in his mind, and he's simply crazy. But the thing is, Mark doesn't believe it. He clearly remembers Harrow shooting him. He has no plans of staying there any longer than he has to, so Mark tries to escape. As he's doing so, he gets caught, and he's chased by a couple of orderlies, so he sneaks into a side room. And in that room is a sarcophagus. Somebody inside of that sarcophagus is screaming for someone to let him out, and Mark does that, only to find that the person he let out was Stephen Grant. Now, instead of the two sharing a body, they're staring at each other. Both men are relieved to see each other, and they also can't figure out how this is even possible. But they don't really care. They just need to figure out a way out. The two run out of the room, and they run right into what can be best described as an Egyptian hippo god. In episode 5, the hippo screams, which causes both Mark and Stephen to scream, and then Mark wakes right back up in Dr. Harrow's office. Dr. Harrow tries to explain to Mark that his mind is currently going from sense to nonsense. Basically, his mind has become a pendulum, from reality to whatever he created in his head. He's currently just sitting in a mental facility in Chicago, Illinois. But Mark isn't convinced. He tells Harrow, "You're not really a doctor." And whatever Harrow says, it doesn't matter, because Mark doesn't believe him. Harrow thinks that what Mark is going through is the fact that his mind is struggling, and when that happens, the mind will often build places to seek shelter for different aspects from our most traumatic memories. It's an organizing principle. Some people see a castle, some people will see a maze, and that's when Mark asks, will some people see a psych ward? And Harrow has to admit, yeah, that's possible. It's about at this moment that Mark says, "You know what, I'm good, thank you so much," and starts to leave, but Harrow can't allow that. He has his orderlies grab Mark and sedate him, and when that happens, Mark is right back with Stephen and this hippo. The hippo is Taweret, the goddess of women and children, and she's going to guide them through their journey to the afterlife. It's about at this moment that Mark starts accepting the fact maybe he is insane. He tells Stephen about Harrow, but Dr. Harrow, not the Harrow that attacked him. And Stephen doesn't want to believe that, so Mark says, "I'll prove it to you. When I open these doors, you're going to see a bunch of patients and orderlies and someone about to yell bingo." But when he does, in fact, open those doors, he doesn't see any of that. He sees that they're on a boat traveling through the sands of Egypt. And he gets insanely excited because he feels like he's not crazy. Taweret explains that the boat is heading to the field of reeds, but they can only get there if their hearts are balanced in life. If they are, they'll spend eternity in paradise, aka the field of reeds. In order to figure out if their hearts are balanced, though, Taweret needs their hearts. She digs into both of their bodies, grabbing them, and putting them both on one side of a scale with a feather on the other. Egyptians believed that the heart was a sign of who they really were in life. If the scales are balanced by the time the journey ends, then a soul is permitted to pass into the field of reeds. If they don't balance, you get thrown overboard. When that happens, the dead will drag you down, and you will remain there forever, frozen in sand. While all of that sounds great for Stephen, it sounds horrible for Mark. He has no plans on going to the field of reeds or being thrown overboard, and he's willing to go so far as to kill the hippo and steal the boat. But the conversation between Mark and Stephen gets interrupted because Taweret is looking at the scales and they're acting really weird. It probably has something to do with the fact that both of their hearts are on one side and not just the usual one. And to Taweret's best knowledge, it's probably acting like this because the hearts aren't full. She tells them each heart feels like it's incomplete. They need to have balanced scales to get into the fields of reeds. So she suggests to them that they go learn about each other. The boat contains all of their memories. So they need to get in there and show each other who they really are. And then hopefully they can balance the scales enough before they arrive at the field of reeds. Mark and Steven walk through that door, and they're right back where they met the hippo, in a mental institution. Mark is still pitching Steven on the idea that they just kill Tawerit, or at the very least tie her up and take the boat over. But Steven likes Tawerit's idea better, learning about each other and balancing the scales. And as they walk down the hall looking in different rooms, each room does have a different memory. They then all of a sudden hear a boy yell for help. They run towards it, but they run into a cafeteria that is filled with dead bodies. And Mark recognizes all of them, because it's all people that he killed. As both Mark and Steven are looking at the scales that seem to be slowing down a little bit, there's a little boy standing there staring at them. Steven starts freaking out a little bit because they're standing in a room of people that Mark killed. And he really hopes that Mark did not kill a kid. But unlike the rest of the people that are dead, this boy is very much alive. And when Steven goes to talk to him, the boy runs away. Mark is begging him not to chase after this kid, but Steven is hell-bent on it. And he follows the kid into a room, locking Mark out of it. Steven is now transferred back into Mark's memory. And it's from when Mark was a little boy. There's Mark's mother, there's Mark's father, and there's Mark's little brother. Mark and his little brother tell their parents that they're heading off to the cave. And the last thing that Mark's mother says to him is, take care of your brother. Steven follows the cave, but things go wrong. There's flooding in the cave, and as much as he tries to save him, Mark's little brother ends up drowning and dying. On the outside, adult Mark can hear Steven going after the kids. He finally catches up to him at the funeral. And while in the first memory, Mark's mother was nice and kind, in the funeral scene, she's not. She blames Mark for everything, screaming at him, "This is all your fault." Steven chases little Mark upstairs while adult Mark is begging him to just stop. But when he goes upstairs, he goes back into another one of Mark's memories. You see just how fractured the relationship between Mark and his mother was. Even years later, while Mark is celebrating a birthday, his mother wants nothing to do with him. When she finally does come downstairs, she once again blames Mark, implying that Mark killed his brother on purpose because of jealousy. Child Mark runs upstairs, Steven runs after him, but this time adult Mark is able to get to him before he enters the room. He pulls him back, and he pulls him back onto a street. Steven can't figure out why Mark remembers his mother like that. Because for Steven, his mother was nothing like that. He also can't figure out what Mark is hiding, why he doesn't want Steven to go back in and see these memories. And that's when you see teenage Mark walk by them, as Mark's father tries to beg him to come back home, saying that his mother will get help. Teenage Mark is done. The next memory they visit is the one where Mark was a mercenary and killed Layla's father. Steven finally finds out how Mark met Khonshu. As they walk through the crowd of dead bodies, Steven asks, "What happened to you?" And Mark points to this giant tomb that is jutting out from the sand. They walk towards it, and they see Mark, the mercenary, who is barely clinging to life, arriving at the foot of Khonshu. He's about to commit suicide, and that's when he's visited by Khonshu for the first time. Khonshu explains to Mark that he needs somebody to be his hands and his eyes and his vengeance. And it's not like Mark has a lot of options at this moment, so he agrees. While Steven is watching this, he feels like Khonshu was taking advantage of Mark. Mark feels like he was keeping them both alive. Mercenary Mark then rises up and becomes Khonshu's Moon Knight. They all of a sudden start hearing screaming, and when they run out of the temple, they run right back into the deck of the boat. To where it explains that unbalanced souls are being judged or condemned to the sands before their time. This is very odd. Mark is convinced that it's Harrow, and Steven explains we have to turn back. Steven turns to Tawerit and says, "This is why we have to go back," but she explains that if you go back, you're going back to a body with a bullet in it. You're not actually going back to your former self. Steven then asks if she can send word to Layla to free Khonshu. And while Mark does want to get away from him, he also realizes this is their only shot. So Tawerit turns the boat around, turning the boat to Osiris's gate because it's the only gate back. While she's doing that, she yells at them to get back inside and make sure the scales are balanced. Steven thinks that they have to go back to that room, the bedroom where little Mark walked into. But Mark says, "No, we don't have to do that. We can just talk this out." And the two start arguing about the ramifications of what could happen if talking it out just isn't enough. Mark starts freaking out, slapping himself, yelling, "You can't make me." And then all of a sudden, Mark isn't with Steven, he's with Dr. Harrow. To Dr. Harrow, Mark has just been reliving traumatic memories for hours. And in his opinion, this is a big step to Mark's recovery. Harrow hands Mark a glass of water and asks, "Do you think you created Steven to hide from all the awful things you feel you've done in your life? Or do you think Steven created Mark to punish the world for what your mother did to you?" Mark doesn't have an answer for that, and Harrow encourages him to open up to Steven. That's the only way that he can truly heal. So Mark, looking in the reflection in the glass, goes back to that room, and he's back with Steven. He sees a young Mark, hiding from his mother as she bangs on the door. Mark remembers it. Steven does not. And that's because all of a sudden, little Mark starts talking in a British accent, commenting about how dirty the room is, how it needs to get cleaned up. And Steven remembers all of that because Steven was created by Mark. As Steven is shocked about this discovery, his mother bursts through the door, grabs a belt, and gets ready to beat on Mark. Mark drags Steven out of there and explains that he doesn't need to see that. That's the whole point of him. And Steven feels hurt by this. He feels like he was being used by Mark. He also feels like the whole time he was the original, when in reality, he's something that Mark just made up. Mark yells at Steven that Steven had an easy life to live. Steven got to grow up and believe that his mother loved him and she was kind and she was still alive. And Steven stops Mark and says, "What? My mother is alive. I just talked to her the other day." Mark tells him that their father called after all those years and told him about their mother's Shiva. Mark couldn't bring himself to actually go in, though. Not after everything she did to him. Steven is in denial. He starts screaming, "Let me out." And when he snaps out of it, he's in Dr. Harrow's office. Dr. Harrow confirms that he is, in fact, talking to Steven this time. And just like with Mark, Steven is in disbelief that the man in front of him is a doctor. Harrow tells him that it was actually Steven who brought himself into the facility right after his mother passed. He had worried the whole time that Steven was never going to be able to acknowledge Mark existed. But Steven starts yelling at him, "My mother's still alive. That's not true." So Harrow, to prove a point, picks up the phone and starts dialing Steven's mother. When it comes time for Steven to actually grab the phone and talk to somebody on the other end, he can't do it. He has to admit, he knows his mother is dead. He suddenly is right back into Mark's memory, remembering everything. The Shiva, Mark's father standing at the window looking at him, Mark being unable to actually go in, and Mark being so stressed out that he transformed back into Steven. When that happened, Steven had no idea how he got on that street, and he dials up his mother, when in reality, he dialed up nobody. He's not talking to anybody. Present-day Mark explains to present-day Steven that he just couldn't face his mother again. It was at that moment where their lives started bleeding into each other. It was about 2 months ago, and up until that point, Mark had a pretty good hand on keeping Steven separate. After this realization, though, the ground shakes, and they know that something's up. Steven looks over and yells, "It's the gates. It's the gates of Osiris. Come on, we gotta hurry." And next thing you know, they're on the deck of the boat again. Tawedit explains that she's never seen the gates of the world above so close. And unfortunately for them, the scales never balance and the journey's over. It's at that moment that the dead start coming overboard and attacking both of them. Steven is hiding, and Mark is trying to do his best to fight him off, but he's not having much luck. Steven realizes he's got to do something. He ends up attacking the dead and destroying all of them, to his surprise and also to Mark's. As Mark is standing on the side of the boat, a little surprised, he gets attacked by another dead person. Steven runs to his defense, but the dead person throws him overboard. It saves Mark, but Steven is stuck, and it doesn't take long for Steven to be frozen in sand. As Mark is screaming for Steven, he all of a sudden finds himself in the reeds. He finds himself in paradise, because when Steven went overboard, the scales balanced. In the series finale, we found out what happened after Harrow shot Mark. He grabs the Ubshapti and then places the scarab on Mark's dead body. Now that he has the Ubshapti, he just needs to go to the Great Pyramid and open it up. He's got company, though. Layla was hiding the whole time. She was able to avoid Harrow's men and see Mark's body, but she also saw the scarab, picked it up, and it helped guide her over to Harrow and his men. So she ends up tagging along, pretending to be one of Harrow's followers. Harrow's men are trying to make their way to the Great Pyramids when they're stopped by a police checkpoint, but Harrow's not concerned at all. Now that he has that kind of power, mortals with guns don't concern him one bit. He shows it off, and just about every one of the police officers isn't worthy. They immediately die. There is only one good man amongst the group, and he is spared. But after this display of power, Layla gets ready to make her move. She pulls a knife out and is ready to sneak up on Harrow and stab him, when one of the dead bodies of a police officer starts talking to her. And it's the goddess Taweret talking through this corpse. Taweret explains that it's Mark who wants her to stop. Right now, Harrow is simply too powerful. In order to get rid of Harrow, they're gonna need Khonshu. So Taweret tells her to break his Ubshapti. It's currently sitting in the Chamber of the Gods, which happens to be exactly where Harrow's headed. Taweret also suggests that maybe Layla can be her avatar because Mark said so many wonderful things about her. But they don't really get to discuss it because Harrow and his men pack up and get ready to go to the Chamber of the Gods. They arrive and break it open, and the rest of the avatars that are supposed to protect it are blown away that somebody is trying to release Ammit, even though they were warned about it. But because of the warning, they have a pretty good idea that Harrow is going to walk through the doors. And sure enough, he does. Harrow tries to get the rest of the avatars to stand down. They don't. And unfortunately for them, Harrow is just too powerful for them. While Harrow is taking care of the other avatars, Layla sneaks around and looks for Khonshu's Ubshapti. She's able to find it and open it up. The first thing that Khonshu notices is that Mark Spector no longer belongs to this world. And Layla says, yeah, that's because of you. Khonshu explains that if Mark is gone, he's going to need an avatar, and he wants Layla to take that over. But after what he did to Mark, she has no interest in that. Khonshu starts pitching her on the fact that she's going to need a plan, she's going to need him, and she says, no, Mark didn't trust you, and I don't trust you. We can work together, but I'm not enslaving myself to you. He explains that what they have to do is rebind Ammit, and only an avatar can do it. But Layla once again says, no, I'm not going to be your avatar. And that's when Khonshu disappears. As Layla was releasing Khonshu, Harrow was releasing Ammit. Ammit is in the shape of a crocodile. And as soon as she shows up, Harrow and his men get down to one knee and tell her that they're there to serve her. She tells Harrow that his scales lack balance. And while he thought that by freeing her, that would help his case, he understands if she has to kill him. She tells him that his scales lack balance because of what lies ahead. And even though he is going to die, for the time being, she's going to keep him alive because he is the avatar that she needs at this moment. Ammit, Harrow, Harrow's men all get ready to leave the Chamber of the Gods and go purify the souls of Cairo and the rest of the world when Khonshu swoops in. Khonshu explains to Ammit that he can't let her do what she's about to do. While they agree that evil is wrong, he wants to judge it after the fact, and she thinks that's stupid. Eventually, this conversation leads to the two fighting. But as they're fighting, in the afterlife, Mark Spector finds himself in the reeds with Taweret. While most people would love to be in the reeds, he doesn't. He can't sit there in paradise knowing that Stephen Grant is frozen in sand, so he turns back. Taweret explains that if he does that, he can never come back, and he's all right with that. He finds Stephen in the sand frozen, and he makes a very impassioned speech, but as he's doing so, he himself is becoming more and more frozen, until finally, both Stephen and Mark are frozen together. They're not frozen very long, though. Osiris's doors open up, and the two are freed to walk back into the real world. As soon as they do, they go back into Mark Spector's body that was shot. He spits out the bullets and transforms into the Moon Knight. And Mark coming back into the real world couldn't have happened at a better time for Khonshu, because he was getting his ass kicked. He was about to die, but he felt Mark's presence, so he teleported out of there and met up with Mark right outside of Ammit's tomb. Khonshu fills Mark in on the fact that Ammit is free, and he's just not powerful enough to stop her. He needs Mark's help. But Mark and Stephen aren't going to accept the fact that Khonshu was just asking nicely. They want to negotiate their terms. With Khonshu in between a rock and a hard place, he has to agree that at the end of this, he will let them go. They then fly off to go stop Ammit and Harrow. But Layla was back in the Chamber of the Gods. She found the head avatar who somehow was still alive. She asks him, how do we stop Ammit? And he explains that the Chamber of the Gods is the most powerful place. From there, they can imprison Ammit into a mortal form, basically putting Ammit into a body instead of a statue. In a body, she'd be way more vulnerable. The problem with doing that is they're going to need more avatars than they currently have. He knows he's on death's door, and sure enough, before he can give her any more insight on how to stop Ammit, he dies. While Layla had no interest in becoming Khonshu's avatar, Taweret seemed pretty cool. She did offer it up, so while in the Chamber of the Gods, she talks to Taweret and accepts the offer. Layla will become Taweret's avatar. She needs to get the hell out of there, though, because the chamber is being destroyed by Harrow. Before he destroys all of it, he heads to the top of the pyramid and uses his staff to do Ammit's work. Every one of Ammit's followers all of a sudden brandishes a scales tattoo, and they go around Cairo judging people. Out of nowhere, you just see a flurry of souls going off into the sky and being swallowed up by Ammit. And as Ammit is eating, she's getting bigger and bigger. But as Harrow is on the top of the pyramid, in swoops Mark as the Moon Knight, and the two start going at it. As they're battling it out, Khonshu starts fighting with Ammit. So you've got Big Khonshu fighting Big Ammit, and down on the ground, you've got the Moon Knight, Mark and Steven, along with Layla, who has become Taweret's avatar and looks like a complete badass, trying to fight off Harrow. The good guys put up a pretty good fight, but at the end of it, it looks like they're about to lose. Harrow and Ammit are just too powerful to defeat. Mark finds himself hurt on the ground and staring at Harrow, who is about to kill him. And he sees the exact same thing in the sky, but it's Ammit who's about to kill Khonshu. Harrow thrusts that staff into Mark's chest, and you see Mark's soul start to be sucked up. But then Mark blacks out, and when he wakes up, he's holding Harrow, who is unconscious, and he's got Harrow's staff to his head. He has no idea how this happened, but when he blacked out, he got out of the predicament. It wasn't Steven, it wasn't Mark, and when Layla asks, "What was that?" all Mark can say is, "I blacked out." They don't have much more time to talk about it, though, because in the sky, they see Ammit carrying away an unconscious Khonshu. Layla tells Mark, "Grab Harrow. I know how to stop Ammit." And they drag Harrow's body to the Chamber of the Gods, placing him on a makeshift altar and performing a spell that is going to imprison Ammit into Harrow's body. And it works. Can't come at a better time for Khonshu, who is about to die. Ammit is sucked up and placed into Harrow. Now with Ammit in a very vulnerable position, Khonshu tells Mark, "Finish it. Leave neither of them alive." And Mark thinks about it, but he throws the weapon down and says, "No. If you want this done, do it yourself. Now release us." Khonshu releases them, and Mark suddenly sees the Moon Knight outfit disappear from his body. But when that happens, there's a big flash of light, and he's back into Harrow's office. Not the Harrow that we just saw, though, Dr. Harrow. At first, Harrow is talking to Steven, and Steven asks, "Is this what reality looks like?" And Dr. Harrow says, "Yes, the imagination is very real." But then Steven turns into Mark. Mark starts turning back into Steven. Dr. Harrow finds himself talking to two different people. Dr. Harrow gets up and says, "I guess our work here is going to continue." But when he starts walking back to his desk, he's got blood on his shoe. Dr. Harrow suddenly asks, "Why am I bleeding?" And Steven gets up and says, "Yeah, I don't think you know as much as you think you do. And while it was tempting to accept your diagnosis, Doc, we'd rather go save the world." Mark and Steven suddenly wake up in Steven's bed. But Harrow, he was taken to a mental institution. He was just going to wither away there when a mysterious person shows up one day and tells the orderly, "I'll take him." And as this person is escorting Harrow out of the building, Harrow notices that there's a bunch of dead bodies around. This mystery person throws Harrow into the back of a limousine, and Harrow finds himself standing across from Khonshu. Harrow's not worried, though. He tells Khonshu, "You can't hurt us." And Khonshu says, "Yeah, that's true. You want to know something? Mark Spector truly believed that after he and I parted ways, I wanted his wife to be my avatar. I mean, why would I ever need anyone else? The fact is, he has truly no idea how troubled he really is." Khonshu then bangs on the window. It goes down, and he says to Harrow, "Meet my friend Jake Lockley." But Jake Lockley looks exactly like Mark Spector and Stephen Grant. And that's when Harrow starts to get really worried. Lockley turns around and says in Spanish, "Today is your turn to lose." Harrow starts begging for his life, but Lockley shoots him. And then the limo just goes off with the license plate that says Spectre. And that is the end of Moon Knight. Thank you so much for getting this point of the recap. I really appreciate it. Please consider subscribing to the channel and subscribing to my Patreon. Both links are in the description. Let me know if you like this series. I did, but I'd be lying if I said I understood it all. I'm very confused right now. Looking forward to seeing what Marvel has coming up next. And once again, thank you so much for checking this out.